SoFi just announced that they are changing issuing banks from the Bancorp Bank to their own company, the SoFi Bank. To help you guys understand how large of an impact this can have for SoFi, I have invited on Tevis from the Fundamentals of Investing podcast. But if you guys like this sort of content, make sure you guys hit the like button and enjoy the video. So, SoFi is moving their debit program from Bancorp Bank all the way over to their own SoFi banking platform. Tevis, what do you think?
Yeah, I think definitely a step in the right direction in terms of consolidating everything in-house. This is something that we've been talking about consistently on the SoFi podcast is this move to have more and more of their business segments all coming down under the same roof as opposed to being dependent on third parties. There's a couple of things that I want to dive into this specifically with regards to their relationship with Bancorp, but maybe first, Tanner, we want to start at what the email was that SoFi sent out. So this email was sent out a couple of days ago, and I'll just read out what it says. We're reaching out to you regarding an update to your SoFi debit card. On February 28th, the issuing bank of your SoFi debit card will change from the Bancorp Bank NA to SoFi Bank NA. We have updated the debit card agreement and deposit account agreement to reflect SoFi Bank NA as the issuer of your debit card. You can find an updated version of the debit card agreement here and an updated version of the deposit agreement here with both of those linked. The changes will take effect on February 28th, 2023.
So, what immediately did you think of whenever people got this email? Because for me, the first thing I thought was, why now rather than all of the times since we've been a chartered bank? Is this potentially now that we actually have processes through Technisys for SoFi, and now they're actually able to have a better, debit program to manage these sorts of things, where before maybe they didn't, so they still lied on the expertise of, the Bancorp Bank? That really gets me thinking.
The first thing that I really thought about when I read this was less so about the timing around it, Tanner, and more so about the switch in itself. The timing around it is a little bit precarious because there's a lot of infrastructure changes that have to happen on the back end. Of course, Technisys is a consideration because this is a step in the right direction with regards to Technisys, that in the near future, they can also expand this out in terms of that consolidation. But for myself, I was less so concerned about when they would do this change with regards to the bank charter, but whether this change would be positive for end users of SoFi with regards to the fees, and whether as a result of this change in the near future, we can also expect some upgrades towards favorable rates down the line or some new benefits towards SoFi Plus down the line, because now this is all under one roof.
Yeah, and that's sort of information that I don't know, right? Like, is the Bancorp Bank actually a cloud native, infrastructure where they're able to change all of these different features on the fly, for SoFi Bank? I'm not sure. But if it is actually transitioned over to Technisys platform, then that means that maybe, there is a better real-time changes to the actual product for the debit program. And then this might actually go into, credit programs and everything like this that potentially we don't have our name on just yet.
Right, that's exactly it, right? Because the changes right now are only for the debit card program. And so presumably you would still imagine that for other programs, they're still using third parties, and that the feasible next step, if you want to extrapolate this out, would be that they further consolidate in-house with their other product lines as well.
From the actual information that I could find online, is that the Bancorp Bank was really taking between 5 to 25 basis points, okay? Or, 0.05% to 0.25% for each transaction amount. So they're not actually charging a one-time rate, it's more transactional based. So if SoFi has found out a way, which I'm sure they have, to actually switch to in-house, it's probably because they got to a point where it's actually become cheaper for them to do so. I actually think that this is, due to Technisys, which could also mean that we're saving a lot on our expenses as well. And then how many cores have they already transitioned over? That's another thing too, right? Like they said that, Technisys was supposed to, take over all of the cores for SoFi. Right now they're running on 4 different partnerships. If they're actually going to be bringing this down to one partnership with Technisys, they said that's going to take between 2023 and 2025. How much
Right.
earlier is this actually happening?
That's exactly it, right? When the timeline for the expected consolidation of all of their cores is 2025. And so it just seems that they're on the right track with regards to this. Quickly moving after getting that bank charter. I mean, it's been a year now since we got the bank charter. And then with regards to the fees, I mean, I think a transactional fee structure is even more dangerous than a flat fee because that can scale exponentially, whereas a flat fee can only really scale, linearly, let's say. That might be a bad analogy, but let's just say. And so the fees that SoFi was paying Bancorp was an interesting area. And I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into that because there's really two schools of thought. Number one being that SoFi can reach profitability, presumably sooner because they're saving on fees. Or if they're not taking that to the bottom line, then they can extend that out as further savings within that SoFi ecosystem. So basically saying that SoFi is going to benefit from this, from their cost structure, and become more profitable as a result of this. However, there is also an argument to be made for less earnings, which I think not many people are really paying attention to, because SoFi Bank has over $10 billion in assets. And as a result of that, they would be too large to be exempt from the Dodd-Frank rules. The Durbin Amendment, which we've talked about on the SoFi Weekly podcast, which came as a result of the 2008 financial crisis, basically saying that if banks are over a certain amount, we're limiting their interchange fees in terms of how much they can earn. And so you have some small organizations that are under this 10 billion mark that can make comparatively a lot more on interchange fees than these big players just due to their size alone. And Bancorp is exempt because, again, when we see Bancorp, the natural association is the US Bancorp, which is almost a $700 billion company. But if you look at the fine print in this email, this is the Bancorp NA, which is actually a company with $7.9 billion in assets. In other words, smaller than SoFi is. And so, and as a result of that, this has a negative implication on the interchange fees that they can charge to their end user. That's the negative bear case. Regardless of that, I think that just for the fact that they're moving more in-house and consolidation, it's a positive, just for the vertical integration alone.
Yeah. And I mean, you also have to assume that, or at least I'm going to assume that there was no deadlines on this actual partnership and that it was SoFi that actually pulled the plug here. Right. And that why would they do this if it wasn't beneficial to them at the end? As if, Anthony Noto and Chris Lapointe don't know about the Dodd-Frank Act. I mean, it's not the case. Right. And so obviously this was sort of beneficial in their part. Yeah. What do you think about that? Do you think that, this partnership did sort of come to an end? And I remember you telling me about an email where they actually had to purchase all of these cards back. How much do you think that this is costing us? Or is this, maybe a necessary hit to our expenses for the next quarter?
Yeah, so further down, I believe in that same email, SoFi mentioned that they agreed to purchase the existing debit cards that were issued by the Bancorp with regards to the people who had debit accounts with SoFi, and that change was also going to take effect on February the 28th. And I think that yes, this is going to cost us in the short term, but honestly, the hassle and the cost of reissuing all of the existing debit cards from SoFi Bank as opposed to just purchasing them off of Bancorp. First of all, it's probably going to cost us more, and it's definitely going to cost us more in terms of that opportunity cost because there's friction that we now forward over to the end user. And so, yes, it's going to cost us to buy all of those, debit cards that were issued from the Bancorp, but ultimately, I think it's fine. And then to your other point, Tanner, I mean, you nailed it. I mean, I'm bullish on this. Don't get me wrong. I definitely think that the management team has a line of sight in terms of their fee structure more so than anybody else, talking about SoFi out there because they're actually running that business and they know exactly what this is going to cost them in terms of interchange fees and how they can make sure to not disrupt that user experience as a result of it.
It also makes me think about the home loan partner that we had previously. I mean, the more external factors that you have outside of SoFi's, control, the more chance that they are going to mess up, right?
Exactly.
And so then we sort of lost an entire business model of ours, the home loans, because we had our trust and partnerships in someone else that we were even still paying a hefty fee for. If we keep it in-house internally, there's no sort of surprises there for how we actually operate the business. So that's also a little bit of security as well.
That's exactly it. So ultimately, I don't think that this will have any immediate changes for end users in terms of what they can expect in their SoFi experience. However, I do think that it does open the door for further positive improvements to the rates that they offer. And it definitely opens the door for further vertical integration of bringing other parts of their business in house and reducing that dependency on external providers.
And so I just wanted to talk a little bit that's all internally for SoFi, but externally. I mean, is there any sort of potential for, now offering SoFi Bank to other, fintechs and these sorts of things that maybe we partner with Galileo? And actually, before I even talk about that, I just want to actually cut myself off and talk about the difference between, what SoFi Bank is doing as an issuing bank and what Galileo does as an issuer processor, because it sounds like the same sort of thing, right? I thought Galileo was the people that actually issued new debit cards, right? There, some people might think that, and I mean, they are actually dealing with the actual transaction processing, but the actual debit card issuing. Bancorp Bank was in charge of actually setting out and delivering those cards. That was sort of under their control. So now SoFi will be managing all of that, and then Galileo will be the people actually processing the payments. Both are different sort of business models, and now we can sort of have all of that under one roof. Going back to my first point, looking at Chime or Robinhood, they also use the Bancorp Bank or Stride Bank or Sutton Bank, right? These are three different types of issuing banks that multiple different neobanks actually use. Those names come up all the time whenever we're looking at small neobanks, but now SoFi is also going to play that role. And now, because we can go back to the companies like Chime and like Robinhood, for example, where we are, the issuer processor for their company, we can also say, hey, why don't we bundle this in and potentially even beat out on the fees that Bancorp is actually charging you? Do you think that that's the next step for SoFi as sort of their master plan, is that we get all three of these things, the core banking, the issuer processor, and the actual issuing bank?
Yeah, I definitely think that that's it's a feasible next step from a business perspective. So, a couple of things from the B2C side, SoFi issuing their own debit cards, I think, will provide more flexibility in terms of what they can do, how they bundle them, how they send them, how they package them. All of those aspects that th- being dependent on a third party just isn't optimal. And then from a B2B perspective, yeah, absolutely, right? Because if you have Galileo now doing all the processing, and then if you have SoFi Bank doing all the issuing, those are both owned by the SoFi, right? The combined entity. And so they can just start to take fees on every part of the process that Bancorp was previously taking from SoFi. SoFi can now take from all of these other players as they further consolidate in house. And so these are just going back full circle, like these are some of the synergies that are allowable now that we have made this shift internally. And I think more and more of SoFi's different business segments, from a loan perspective or from SoFi Invest or from SoFi Bank, as we go more in house, similarly, it will allow for these ecosystem benefits across the grid.
I even was thinking while you were saying a lot of these things, is I wonder if whenever this actually does expand into our credit card, issuing bank for all of our credit cards as well, which I'm sure will be the next step for this, does this also affect, potentially the premium credit cards? We've only been on one SoFi credit card this whole time. Potentially this could be added fees that potentially they weren't ready to expand with their current issuing bank. If that's under the house, then those fees will be down, and then maybe we could get a premium travel card or something like this that SoFi has always been wanting to launch.
Yeah, I think credit cards could be a feasible next step. I don't want us to get too into the weeds with regards to the speculation. All that to say that I think it was Riley that first brought this up on Twitter, where he just highlighted the fact that SoFi is hiring in their credit card department for product managers, for program leads, and for a bunch of different roles. And so it seems as though credit cards is top of mind for them to further expand that business segment in later 2023.
By the way, the Bancorp Bank makes around, and they're a tiny company, but they make about $160 million in non-interest income by being the issuing bank for other companies. So, that's not just SoFi's actual fees alone. That's dealing with all these different companies like Chime, like, Robinhood. But at least maybe that could be a segment that we could dig into if potentially we could reach out to these companies and say, hey, you know what, your prepaid cards, your debit cards, you don't need to just be with them. You're already a Galileo customer. You're already a Technisys customer. Join us for the trifecta. I just think that's the perfect sort of business model on the, the tech platform that we perfectly need. And then it also sort of combines with our own company because we are a neobank as well.
Yeah, and just to build on that, the value proposition is very simple, and it's the same value proposition that we're offering B2C that we could be offering B2B. What is that? It's a unified experience of consolidation. Everything, your one-stop shop for SoFi services. Because right now, the further that we go in house, we have the benefit that we're solving the problem that we previously had, which was that we were dependent on too many different players. And so if you can imagine from, let's say, a Chime perspective or a Robinhood perspective, if they want to issue credit cards, sure. If they want to issue debit cards, sure. If they want to do payment processing, sure. They can all do that with one business, which is SoFi Galileo as a combined entity, as opposed to now going to different players or a Bancorp plus a Galileo plus somebody else plus somebody else. Because SoFi, by consolidating themselves, not only do they save on fees for the SoFi business, but they also can save potentially by bundling for B2B later on down the line.
Very well summarized. I mean, awesome. And we're going to leave it at that. So make sure you guys hit the like button on this video and check out the Fundamentals of Investing podcast. Tevis runs a great show over there. So make sure you guys check out his latest videos. But aside from that, appreciate you all watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Bye for now.